India, Bharat and Pakistan. The fall of the Mughal Empire and the rise of pan-Islamic movements in Bharat. The Ahli Hadith, Deobandi, Barelvi, Nadwa and Aligarh movements. Some thoughts on the ideology of pan-Islamic movements in the subcontinent. The book has been embraced with extraordinary warmth and consumed in the manner it was intended to be. The decision to include extracts from sources has been received well by the readers. I would not have been able to see this book through within a reasonable time frame, given my burgeoning professional commitments. Thanks to Praveen Tiwari for burning the midnight oil to ensure that this book is released with minimal delay. Kripa Raman and C. Sai Priya must be acknowledged for their fantastic editorial contributions. Syed Dilshad Ali for brilliantly executing my idea for the cover design. Thanks to the Devatas, in particular Durga Ma, Jagat Guru Adi Shankara Bhagavapada and the Mahaperiyavar of Kanchi Kamakotyam.
This book was originally intended to take the discussion forward by examining the critical period between 1919 and 1951. I concluded that in order to better understand the cogitations of the Constituent Assembly between 1946 and 1950, it was imperative to panoramically view the period between 1905 and 1924. I will examine the combined impact of European and Middle Eastern colonialities on the evolution of constitutional thought between 1925 and 1950. This book helps the reader draw parallels between the challenges faced by the Indic civilization during the tumultuous period of 1905 unaltered on the one hand, and present-day Bharat on the other. It is my position, based on my reading, that the very same attitudes which ultimately led to the partition of Bharat in 1947 are still alive and kicking, albeit under sanitized labels. This has created the false impression of communal harmony having existed between Hindus and Muslims prior to the employment of the so-called divide and rule policy by the British in 1905. An Anglo-centric approach, which gives Middle Eastern coloniality a free pass in the context of Bharat's partition, is largely a product of the post-colonial school.
In less than 200 years of Babur's victory in the First Battle of Panipat in 1526, Mughal influence was largely limited to Delhi. The simultaneous decline of two avowedly Islamic empires was a cause for concern among Muslim intellectuals of the time. Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, 1701-1792, in Central Arabia and Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, 1701-1762, in Bharat, both of whom attributed the decline of their Dehlavi may be treated as the more direct progenitor of Islamic revivalism in the Bharatiya subcontinent. While Wahhab's movement was named after him and his followers were called Wahhabis, the movement started by Dehlavi. Dehlavi, as part of his teachings, exhorted Muslims of the subcontinent not to integrate into society. He urged them to see themselves as part of the global Ummah. He mandated that Muslims of the subcontinent follow the customs and mores of the early Arab Muslims.
Sirandi wanted a state which was Islamic in both letter and spirit. Sirandi effectively represented the Sunni consensus against religious and cultural syncretism at all levels. Dehlavi was witness to the unstoppable crumbling and bleeding of the Islamic edifice in Bharat. After Nadir Shah's sack of Delhi in 1731-1740, Dehlavi was pushed to concentrate his energies on Abdali. He invited Abdali to invade Bharat to check the resurgent Hindu power represented by the Marathas and the Jats. This time, he invited Abdali to invade Bharat to check the resurgent Hindu power represented by the Marathas and the Jats. In 1803, after the Battle of Delhi between the British and the Marathas, the British gained control over Delhi, which led to the Fatwa-e-Azizi being issued by Shah Abdul Aziz. The fatwa declared all of Bharat Dar al-Harb, or House of War, in control of the infidels. Other parts of the country saw the rise of pan-Islamic movements that shared the goal of restoration of Islamic supremacy over Bharat.
The banner of Islam was used to unite people with the intention of reclaiming what was seen as Muslim territory held by the usurpers, namely the British and the Hindus. What is critical to note is the merger of the Faraisi movement in Bengal and Dehlavi's school of thought. Shah Abdul Aziz had to anoint Barelvi as the spiritual successor to his father's vision of restoring Tariqa-i-Muhammadiyya in Bharat and its status as Dar al-Islam. His preaching, which started in Delhi around 1818, took him to Muzaffarnagar, Saharanpur, Deoband, Gangoh, Nanauta, Rampur, Bareilly, Shahjahanpur, among other places. His vehement call for practice. Barelvi's arrival renewed religious fervor among the Muslims of Bengal. He urged the Nizam of Hyderabad, Prince Kamran of Herat, Amir Nasrullah of Bukhara and various Pathan tribes in the northwest frontier to liberate Bharat from the hands of the British and Hindu infidels.
In 1827, Barelvi wanted to liberate Kashmir from the Sikhs, which was, however, foiled by the legendary Sikh commander Hari Singh Nalwa. On the 6th of May 1831, at the Battle of Balakot, with Prince Sher Singh leading the Sikhs, Barelvi was beheaded and Shah Ismail Dehlavi too was killed. The seeds for this terror network were sown by Barelvi in the 1800s. The followers of Barelvi have not forgotten their history. Those who were the object of hatred of Barelvi and his Mujahideen seem to suffer from a short memory. Ultimately, history tends to reward those with a long collective memory. Ali brothers stepped up ante after death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh in 1839, 118. Wahhabis under Inayat Ali and Syed Akbar Shah of Sitana made it difficult for both the Sikhs and the Dogras to hold on to their respective territories.
Prasad fails to acknowledge that surely the British could not have been under the misconceived notion that a network would pose a threat solely to the Sikhs and never turn on it. Even latter-day authors like Qiyamuddin Ahmad were of the view that until 1852 the British were either unaware of the existence of a countrywide network of a single organization or did not take it seriously despite local authorities bringing it to their notice. Inayat's premature and ill-prepared campaigns against the British awakened them to the extent of the Wahhabi resolve and network all over British India. R.C. Majumdar categorically states that it is not surprising that the Wahhabis as a body practically kept aloof from the mutiny of 1857. Qiyamuddin points out that while Inayat used the mutiny to his advantage by increasing the pressure on the British in the NWF, the history of the Wahhabi movement does not lend itself to the kind of wishful secularization that Ahmad resorts to. This tendency to secularize history by branding documented facts as communal has operated to the detriment of Indic consciousness.
In 1863, the British launched what has since come to be known as the Umbrella Campaign. It proved to be a near disaster since the British underestimated the Wahhabis. The Punjab government was forced to declare that the Wahhabis represented a permanent source of danger to British rule in India. Between 1863 and 1883 a number of Wahhabi leaders were arrested and prosecuted for, among other things, waging war against the Queen. Sedition was inserted in the Indian Penal Code through an amendment in 1870 primarily to deal with the Wahhabi threat. It was inserted as Section 124A in the Penal Code by way of an amendment which came into force on the 25th of November 1870. Until then, Section 121 of the Code, which penalized waging war against the Queen, had been invoked against Wahhabi leaders. There were those who entertained the opinion that peace between the Muhammadan population and their Christian rulers, however just, was a thing impossible. The absence of protection and liberty between Muslims and infidels is essential in a religious war, and that condition does not exist here. If a Christian were oppressive and did not afford protection, a jihad would be lawful if there was a probability of success.
Qiyamuddin Ahmad points out that even a full decade after the introduction of Section 124A, the Wahhabis continued to operate in Bhopal, Rangoon, Bihar and other places. Ahli Hadith, Deobandi, Barelvi, Nadwa and Aligarh movements. The Ahli Hadith, Deobandi, Barelvi, Nadwa and Aligarh movements broadly fell into these baskets. Some of these movements would go on to establish madrasas to institutionalize the teachings of Dehlavi. The Ahli Hadith movement was founded by Maulana Syed Muhammad Najir Hussain Muhaddith Dehlvi and Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan Bhopali. The Ahli Hadith rose to become one of the most popular theological seminaries in northern India. The goal of this movement too was to revive Islam in consonance with Dehlavi's teachings.
Both the founders of Deoband, namely Maulana Muhammad Qasim Nanotawi and Maulana Rashid Ahmad Gangohi, were educated at Dehlavi's school. By 1879, the Dar al-Ulm, Dao, was second only to the Al-Azhar Seminary in Cairo in terms of its standing in the Islamic world. By 1924, the Jew had a strong presence in Peshawar, which resulted in establishment of the Jamiat Ulema. Several prominent Deobandis went on to establish their own movements. The foundation of the Dar al-Ulm at Deoband in AD 1866 was the greatest achievement of the Wahhabi school of thought in India. The Barelvi movement arose in response and opposition to both the Ahli Hadith and Deobandi movements. The Nadwatul Ulema was founded as a council in 1893 by a group of ulema and Muslim officials in the employ of the British. The Amaya movement was founded by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, 1838-1908. There was a gradual movement from Puritanism to some room for accommodation of Western education alongside traditional Islamic education.
Pan-Islamic movements arose after significant loss of Muslim state power. This rejuvenation of Middle Eastern coloniality has necessarily come at the expense of Indic consciousness. Indic consciousness must revive its own ability to produce society-based institutions. Aligarh movement was founded by Syed Ahmad Khan. Khan was a product of Dehlavi's seminary Madrasa-i-Rahimiyya. Dehlavi's views in a modern idiom, through the prism of the nation-state prevalent during his own life and times. Cross-section of Hindus learned English and became part of colonial infrastructure. Muslims of Bengal too aspired to become part of the colonial infrastructure. Both Hindus and Muslims established distinct community-specific institutions.
Aligarh movement was the first, national, Muslim movement to embrace modernity. Institutions such as the Darul Uloom Nadwatul Ulema and the Jamia Millia Islamia were later established in 1898 and 1920. Syed Ahmad Khan established institutions catering to both Sunnis and Shias. Khan's maternal relatives were disciples of Shah Abd al-Aziz. Khan's father, Syed Ahmad Takki, was a close friend of the then Mughal Emperor Akbar II. Syed Ahmad Khan felt that Muslims were being unfairly singled out for their participation in the mutiny. Khan sought to build a defense for Muslims in Bharat by advancing two specific positions. Maulvi Inayat Ali preached jihad to some of the Indian troops.
On the subject of the proselytizing push by the Christian colonial establishment triggering the mutiny, I agree with Khan. The Hindustanis used, as I have said, to feel an increasing dismay at the annexation of each successive country by the Honorable East India Company. They believed that government intended to force the Christian religion and foreign customs upon Hindu and Muslim alike. Missionaries introduced a new system of preaching. In violent and unmeasured language they attacked the followers in the holy places of other creeds. In some districts the missionaries were actually attended by policemen from the station. When the village schools were established, the general belief was that they were instituted solely with the view of teaching the doctrines of Jesus. Khan ran down the Maulvis and Maulanas who called for jihad as pseudo-Maulvis, and the Mughal dynast Bahadur Shah Zafar himself as an imbecile king. On his efforts to protect the British during the mutiny, his friend G.F.I. Graham wrote as follows: 31 During the anxious weeks that the English ladies, gentlemen and children remained in Bijnor, Syed Ahmad Khan did all that man could do.
Syed Ahmad Khan's case of Muslim loyalty towards the British Empire was the convenient product of the Muslim inability to compete with the British on the battlefield. Khan proves himself to be the foreigner of the Pakistani mindset, which creates the bad cop, plays the good cop and takes the West for a ride. Syed Ahmad Khan's retaliation, or verbal jihad, took the form of 12 essays in Urdu titled Khutbat-i-Ahmadiyya. Khan felt the need to prove that his religion too was rational, scientific, modern, and, therefore, relevant. Khan was seen by his contemporaries as a westernized, Islamic reformer with Wahhabi convictions. Khan was of the view that Islam, if practiced in its pristine form, was not at loggerheads with scientific temper and progress.
Syed Ahmad Khan founded the Muhammadan Anglo-Oriental College as a primary school on the 24th of May 1875. Sunni and Shias were allowed to formulate their own religious curricula in the college. British support to the Aligarh establishment is evident from the fact that several Englishmen contributed to the construction of the college. In 1893, under Beck's encouragement, a few Muslim intellectuals established the Muhammadan Anglo-Oriental Defence Association of Upper India. Beck held the following views on the Congress demand for introduction of democracy in India. 57. While pledging loyalty to the British, his vision was restoration of the former position of the Muhammadan nation, through a peaceful revolution. Under the stewardship of Syed Ahmad Khan, the Aligarh movement played a hugely impactful role in the fostering of Muslim nationalism. The two-nation theory was not the product of a sudden disillusionment with the Hindu-majority Indian National Congress.
The two-nation theory manifested itself in the second-class treatment of Hindu students in the Aligarh College. Syed Ahmad Khan's two-nation theory will be pushed under the garb of opposition to Hindu majoritarianism and minority oppression. In 1886, in response to the founding of the Congress, Syed Ahmad Khan founded the annual Muslim Mohammedan Educational Conference. In November 1887, he wrote in The Pioneer that the parliamentary form of government was unsuited to a country containing two or more nations tending to oppress the numerically weaker. Here are a few relevant extracts from his speech which showcase his Dela-White worldview. The Viceroy should be as loyal to Her Majesty the Queen Empress of India as our present Viceroy, Lord Dufferin. The first condition for the introduction of competitive examination into a country is that all people in that country should belong to one nation. The Hindus of our province, the Bengalis of the East, and the Marathas of the Deccan, do not form one nation.
Is there any hope that we and our brave brothers the Rajputs can endure it in silence? What will be the result for the Hindus of our province, though their condition be better than that of the Mohammedans? If government entertains unfavorable sentiments towards our community, then I say with the utmost force that these sentiments are entirely wrong. We do not live on fish, nor are we afraid of using a knife and fork lest we should cut our fingers. If government entertains these bad sentiments, it is a sign of incompetence and folly. If government entertains suspicions of us, it is wrong. But do her the justice and admit that there is a reasonable ground for such suspicions. If any ill will exist, it should be cleansed away. A second error of government of the greatest magnitude is that it does not give appointments in the army to those brave people whose ancestors did not use the pen to write with.
When you conquered India, what did you yourself do? For how many centuries was there no Hindu in the army list? When the time of the Mughal family came and mutual trust was established, the Hindus were given very high appointments. Government has advanced one step. She has also shown a desire to admit us to the civil appointments in the empire. It was my duty to tell those things which, in my opinion, are necessary for the welfare of my nation, and to cleanse my hands before God the Omnipotent, the Merciful, and the Forgiver of sins. It is incumbent on me to show what evils would befall my nation from joining in the opinions of the Bengalis. If any rush on his own inclination and opinion join them, we do not care a lot. If my Bengali friends had not adopted this wrong course of action, I should have had nothing to do with the National Congress. I frankly advise my Hindu friends that if they wish to cherish their religious rights, they can never be successful in this way.
There is, as far as I am aware, in Lower Bengal a much larger proportion of Mohammedans than Bengalis. If the aspirations of those Bengalis who are making so loud an agitation be fulfilled, it will be extremely difficult for the Bengalis to remain in peace even in Bengal. To create animosity between them is good neither for peace, nor for the country, nor for the town. The principle of representative government is that it is government by a nation, and that the nation in question rules over its own people and its own land. It is opposed to the true principles of government, and is harmful for the peace of the country. If we have the right to elect members for the Legislative Council, there is no reason why we should not have the right to elect members for the Imperial Council. You can appreciate these matters, but they cannot who have never held a country in their hands nor won a victory. See what freedom she has given in her laws, and how careful she is to protect the rights of her subjects. Make yourselves her friends, and prove to her that your friendship with her is like that of the English and the Scotch.
I do not say that in the British government all things are good. I do not say that in the British government all things are good. Nobody can say that there is any government in the world, or has ever been, in which there is nothing bad, be the government Mohammedan, Hindu, or Christian. If you ask for such things as government cannot give you, then it is not the fault of government, but the folly of the askers. Khan was conscious of the growing Muslim demographic in Bengal and its implications for political assertion by Muslims. In 1888, when Aohame and Badruddin Tayyabji tried to secure Khan's support for the Congress, he retorted thus, 78. Majumdar cites Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who remarked that 70 millions of Mohammedans were more or less hostile to national aspirations. Majumdar cites Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who remarked that 70 millions of Mohammedans were more or less hostile to national aspirations.
Khan's mentor at Madrasa-i-Rahimiyya, Shah Muhammad Ishaq Dehlavi, had reached out to the Ottoman Sultan to advocate for a global Muslim movement. When Muslims in India celebrated Turkish victory over Greece, he reacted as follows, 90 To call such a victory the victory of Islam is to do no honor to Islam. Khan's commitment to his community and his attitudes towards the Ottomans was a product of his pragmatic loyalty to the British. Afghani presented the most formidable challenge to Khan's leadership of Muslims in Bharat. Afghani believed that one of the essential prerequisites of Islam was to purge the minds of the people of all false beliefs and superstitions. He too believed that regeneration of Muslim society everywhere lay in returning to Islam as preached by the Prophet and his immediate followers. Afghani was closer than Syed Ahmad Khan to Dehlavi in his views on the need for Muslims in Bharat to rethink themselves as part of the global Ummah.
After his expulsion from Istanbul, Afghani went back to Cairo in mid-1878, where he lived for 8 years until his expulsion in 1879 by Egypt. Afghani came in contact with a number of followers of Syed Ahmad Khan in Hyderabad. In 1881, Afghani published a scathing criticism of Khan's views in his tome The Refutation of the Materialists. During the reign of Sultan Abdul Aziz, the khutbah, Friday sermon, was read in mosques in Bharat in his name. Afghani invested his energies in vain to get Russia to declare war on the British and involved himself in the politics of Persia. Ironically, Sultan Abdul Hamid later kept Afghani in confinement in Istanbul until his death in 1897. The Sultan has chosen love of the nation, Amat-i-Millat, and has seen his honor in the perpetuation of this holy people, Amat-i-Muqaddase. There is no doubt that the English nation will be made happy by this wise movement, which will be the cause of the repulsion of the Indians from the Russians. When the unity of all the Muslims becomes understood by the English nation, of course they will always maintain
Russia's aims and convey with an eloquent tongue that if God forbid, a calamity befalls the Ottoman government, neither will permanence remain to Makkah nor to Medina. And I shall make clear the advantages of zeal and ardor and will make a general call to the Milli war to all, young and old, weak and strong. And I shall send missionaries of sharp tongue to Kashgar and Yarkand to call the believers of those lands to the unity of Thay. Afghani would co-found the Jamiat Ulema-e-Hind in 1919 as part of the Khilafat movement. After getting financial aid in India, it occurs to Afghani that he would like some medals for the Afghan, Baluch, and Turkoman armies. The commission of such an important, weighty affair without permission and authorization from the government would be considered a presumption and an unacceptable act. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad would go on to play a key role in the Khilafat movement. At the end of the Khilafat movement, Azad would join the Indian National Congress.
By 1898, the sagging fortunes of Middle Eastern coloniality, consciousness in Bharat had been resuscitated by a slew of ulema-driven Dehlavite movements. Thanks to the efforts of Syed Ahmad Khan and Syed Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, Muslim nationalism and pan-Islamism had firmly taken root in Muslim society in Bharat. Prior to the arrival of the European colonizer, Muslim historians and chroniclers did not feel the need to cite the caste system as the reason for conversion of Hindus to Islam. British explanations were invented by the British to lay the ground for evangelical activity in Bharat. The stratification of Muslims along the lines of their Arab and non-Arab origins in the subcontinent has nothing to do with infecting Islam with caste. What changed the state of affairs was the arrival of Sayyid Jamal al-Din al-Afghani in Calcutta in 1882. Afghani's pan-Islamism and anti-colonial position influenced the Muslim elite of Calcutta. Muslim leaders of Bengal preferred establishment of separate institutions for the community that combined Islamic and English education.
Hunter Commission report shed light on the status of adoption of English education by the Muslim community at the time. Reasons alleged by the Muhammadans for holding aloof from the education offered in government schools were debated. Some held that the absence of instruction in the tenets of their faith, and still more the injurious effects of English education in creating a disbelief in religion, were the main obstacles. Others, though a small minority, were of opinion that religion had little to. The Hindu elites abandoned indigenous knowledge structures and systems. Urdu was the preferred medium of education, given its association with Islam. From the beginning of their rule, Persian was the official language of the Musliman rulers. English education allowed Hindu leaders to use European political thought to merely demand greater participation in governance of Bharat. Muslim leaders to embrace an Anglo-Islamic model of education went hand in hand with Muslim separatism and their pragmatic British loyalist position to keep Hindus in check.
Prior to 1874, the province comprised Bengal proper, Bihar, Orissa, now Orissa, the entire United Provinces, including Delhi. It was the Orissa famine of 1866 that led to the realization that Bengal was too large a province to manage. Curzon was driven by the belief that Indians, as a race, lacked the ability to govern themselves with honesty. In matters of bureaucracy, Curzon was driven by the belief that Indians, as a race, lacked the ability to govern themselves with honesty. Curzon then went on to introduce a slew of legislative measures which made him hugely unpopular among the educated and politically conscious cross-sections of the Bharatiya population. The Aligarh Institute Gazette started mobilizing large-scale support for the scheme by taking the unequivocal position that the Muslims of the subcontinent were a single and separate nation from the Hindus owing to their religious identity, and that there was a need to organize and consolidate the members of the community. Several political organizations for Muslims were set up in Saharanpur and Aligarh in the United Provinces, and in Murshidabad in Bengal, which led to calls for establishment of.
While ostensibly administrative and economic reasons were offered as justifications for the partition of Bengal, clearly one of the central considerations was to break the momentum of the nationalist movement in Bengal. The opposition to the proposal to partition Bengal was simply unprecedented in the history of public agitation in this country, in its magnitude, volume and intensity. In 1800 Dekcha was a city of 200,000 people. In 1870 it had sunk to 69,000. Since then it has risen, owing to the circumstances that I have mentioned, to 90,000 in the last census. But whereas the increase was 10,000 between 1870 and 1880, it has only been 11,000 in the ensuing 20 years. That Curzon's views and strategy were shared by others in the colonial establishment is evident from H. Risley's letter dated 13 September 1904. One of Curzon's stated intentions was to nip the Bengali Hindu-led, nationalist movement, in the bud by using Muslims of eastern Bengal and Assam as a counterweight. Ironically, Curzon's actions provided direct impetus to the movement and also resulted in giving concrete political expression to Muslim separatism.
Syed Ahmad Khan's vision of a mutually beneficial alliance between the British and Muslims was beginning to take shape. That the combined province of Eastern Bengal and Assam was the reward for the pro-British loyalism of Muslims was a position echoed even by later Muslim scholars. To ask the Secretary of State for India whether he has received and considered a memorial, signed by 60,000 of the inhabitants of Eastern Bengal, protesting against the proposals of the Government of India in reference to the partition of Bengal, and whether he will name a date upon which they will be in the hands of members of the House. To ask the Secretary of State for India whether, in regard to the decision arrived at as to the partition of Bengal, he will state the line of demarcation. To ask if the Secretary of State for India will include in the papers to be laid in reference to the partition of Bengal. To ask if these papers will be in the hands of members before the rising of the House on Friday next. To ask if the Viceroy will do what he can to make the change palatable to the population concerned.
Muslim separatism in Bengal culminated in the founding of the All India Muslim League in December 1906. The concept of communal representation through separate electorates on the basis of religion was introduced in the Indian Councils Act of 1909. This period also witnessed the growth of revolutionary organs such as Yugantar, Bande Mataram and Sandhya. Revolutionaries such as Barindra Ghosh called for the destruction of British rule in Bharat. Those who sought a colonial form of self-government were called moderates, liberals. Those who wanted to maintain pressure on the colonial establishment through the Swadeshi and boycott movements were branded extremists, nationalists, Gokhale. Only madmen outside lunatic asylums could think or talk of independence.
The moderates reconciled loyalty to England with Indian patriotism. For the extremists, Indian patriotism and loyalty to British rule were two conflicting entities. The extremists, nationalists were marginalized as a fringe, unreasonable and impractical minority. Coming in contact with Western people and Western culture, the Indian mind could not fail to expand in the direction of Western ideas and institutions. Roy derided Sanskrit and indigenous knowledge systems, and implored the colonial master to shine the light of Western education on the heathen native. Roy's Hindu reform agenda has strengthened Hindu indigeneity and consciousness. Khan's Aligarh model strengthened Middle Eastern consciousness and ultimately paved the way for the creation of Pakistan.
Nominal legislative participation was introduced for the first time through the Indian Councils Act of 1861. Governor-General, Viceroy could nominate Indians as additional members to his council, and Indians could hold non-official positions for a tenure of 2 years. The credit of organizing the Indian National Congress undoubtedly belongs to Alan Octavian Hume. Hume was inspired by a genuine sympathy for the interest and welfare of India. He was deeply impressed by the general discontent in India threatening imminent danger to the government. Lord Ripon's strategy was to ensure that expectations and aspirations did not turn into disaffection and enmity towards the British establishment. In March 1883, Hume began giving effect to his idea of a political organization that could act as a single all-India body of educated Indians.
The principle of equality, regardless of race, was resented by Englishmen. Some saw the Ilbert Bill as a curtain raiser for grant of self-government to India. Others warned that English capital and enterprise would leave Bharat if the Ilbert Bill and the policy of racial equality it stood for were implemented. In May 1885, Hume met Dufferin in Simla, where he presented his plan to hold the first Indian National Congress of the Indian Political Union. It appears that Dufferin, who had taken over from Ripon as the Governor-General in December 1884, gave his approval to Hume's plan. As to why leading Indian political leaders joined the Congress under Hume, R.C. Majumdar writes, 60. The government, they rightly thought, would not look with kindly eyes upon any political organization of the Indians. If the leading part were taken by an Englishman, who once held a high office, the hostility of the official class would be neutralized.
Most accounts of Indian nationalism include, or begin with, the last 2 or 3 decades of the 19th century. For many historical accounts, the history of Indian nationalism is synonymous with the history of the Indian National Congress. The methods they employed in pursuit of their goals included neither mass mobilization nor the extra-constitutionalist methods that were later to be characteristic of the Congress. Moderate serves to distinguish and contrast this nationalism from its extremist competitor and critic. A second use of the term occurs where what is being stressed is the ambiguous or two-sided nature of the phenomenon, that it was nationalist but in a very qualified fashion, because its demands were modest and were accompanied by loyalty to crown and empire. Banerjee felt that the National Conference and the Indian National Congress had the same agenda. The timing of the conference around Christmas spoke volumes of the Congress's moderate nationalism.
G. Subramania Iyer was chairman of the Indian National Congress in 1885. Nauroji, coloniality was not just a product of conditioning but was also a pragmatic necessity to survive under the colonial administration. Banerjee's political ideas were already in line with Hume's version of moderate and British loyalist nationalism. Nauroji credited English education for bringing Indians out of the darkness of Asiatic despotism. Khan saw Congress as a Hindu supremacist organization which did not represent and could not claim to represent Muslims. Syed Ahmad Khan was crystal clear about his priorities. He wanted to reclaim state power for Muslims. The degree to which the Congress was willing to genuflect to and accommodate Muslims is evident.
Hume had resigned from his position as the General Secretary of the Congress and was keen to return to England. The Madras session of the Congress of 1894 was held in the backdrop of this disappointment. By 1899, the fact that the Congress was an anglicized organization which had no intentions of demanding complete independence was a widely shared sentiment. The extremists, nationalists were successful in and responsible for pushing the envelope. By 1897, Tilak's writings in his papers Kesari and Maratha had assumed revolutionary tones. To distance the Congress from Tilak's views, Sankaran Nair underscored again the peaceful, British loyalist DNA of the Congress. Rift between the moderates and the extremists had reached a point where the Congress's primary agenda at the Lucknow session was to put together an internal constitution to rein in the extremists. Ironically, barely 2 months before the Lucknow session, the moderate camp of the Congress proved the extremists right when they displayed what Lord Curzon called a most exemplary and gratifying loyalty.
Banerjee branded the nationalists as pessimists for their lack of faith in the Congress's constitutional methods and the fairness of the British government. The moderate leaders realized that the Congress's methods and their non-effectiveness were beginning to push society into the arms of the nationalists and revolutionaries. The partition of Bengal in October 1905 supplied the nationalists in the Congress with the perfect opportunity to call out the mendicancy of the moderates. The general impact of the nationalist group on the Congress's style of functioning can be gauged from the fact that before leaving Bharat in October 1905, Curzon wrote to then Secretary of State for India, John Broderick. While Gokhale supported the Swadeshi movement, he was still not enthusiastic about the boycott. Some may be tempted to treat Muslim attitudes towards the Swadeshi and boycott movements as a reaction to the Hindu nationalism of Rai and Tilak. No sooner had the partition of Bengal materialized than the ulema resumed their incendiary preaching about how the flag of Islam had been revived in Bharat through the partition.
Fuller resigned in August 1906, 134, which was seen by Muslims as the British establishment succumbing to pressure from Hindus. Up till now the Mohammedans of Bengal have been careless. They have now begun to feel the consequences of their carelessness. The period from 1904 to 1906 was a defining one for the proponents of the two-nation theory. Introduction of the elective component on a wider scale would mean being outnumbered by Hindus in the legislative councils. Muslim leaders from across the country urged Mohsin-ul-Mulk of the Aligarh establishment to take up the issue with the viceroy. Archbold suggested that nomination or representation by religion be introduced to meet Muslim opinion. Mohsin-ul-Mulk confirmed receiving a draft of the memorial to be submitted to Minto.
There was a significant meeting of interests between the British government and the Muslim leadership in Bharat. Both were deeply troubled and disturbed by the growing national movement for greater political autonomy. On the 1st of October 1906, a deputation of 35 Muslim representatives headed by the Aga Khan was received by Minto in Simla. Amir Ali's article titled A Cry from the Indian Muslims was published in August 1882 in the 19th century. Ali, The oversensitiveness of the Indian government has the tendency to discourage, among the intellectual and educated classes of India, the frank expression of political feelings. Ali, the Muslims possess neither the wealth nor the education of the Hindus, and in consequence, have generally failed to attract the attention of the authorities to their grievances. Under their own government, the Muslims possessed several avenues to wealth and power. The army and police were office read by them. The administration of justice and the collection of the imperial revenues were largely monopolized by Muslims.
Amir Ali argued that the advent of the British had resulted in loss of wealth, position and power for Muslims in India. He underscored the benefits accrued to Hindus as a consequence of their English education through better representation in government jobs. Ali also treated Hindus and Muslims as two distinct races, reflecting his belief in Syed Ahmad Khan's two-nation theory. Mohammedans of India have always placed implicit reliance on the sense of justice and love of fair dealing that have characterized their rulers. Recent events have stirred up feelings, especially among the younger generation of Mohammedans. Mohammedans feel aggrieved that Mohammedan judges are not more frequently appointed to the high courts and chief courts of judicature. Local authorities should, in every case, be required to declare the number of Hindus and Mohammedans entitled to seats on municipal and district boards.
Minto's reply, 158. Extracted below are the relevant portions of Minto's reply, 158. Mohammedan community of the new provinces for the moderation and self-restraint they have shown under conditions which were new to them, and as to which there has been inevitably much misunderstanding, and that I may at the same time sympathize with all that is sincere in Bengali sentiment. Mohammedan community of Eastern Bengal and Assam can rely as firmly as ever on British justice and fair play. I should be very far from welcoming all the political machinery of the Western world. The great mass of the people of India have no knowledge of representative institutions. The British were willing to take the Mohammedans into their fold, since they felt the necessity of a pawn on the chessboard of Indian politics. Muslims in India had been holding out the prospect of being used as anti-national forces since 1870. Within days of the deputation, the Aga Khan suggested it convert itself into a permanent Mohammedan committee.
Nawab Salimullah floated a 10-point proposal for an all-India Muslim confederacy. It contained the most proximal seat for the All-India Muslim League. Mohammedan All-India Confederacy would be the mouthpiece of all the various Muslim institutions, social, religious and political. The association would be the mouthpiece of all the various Muslim institutions, social, religious and political. A confident and assertive form of nationalism was unacceptable to the moderates in the Congress, the British establishment and the Muslims. Any attempt to revive or retain civilizational memory must necessarily be branded and treated as extremism. Nauroji reiterated that the Congress's goal was self-government within the British Empire.
On the contrary, Nauroji quoted Syed Ahmad Khan and called him a nationalist to the bone, in an attempt to court Muslims. There was widespread panic among the Hindu minority population in East Bengal and a growing estrangement and bitterness between the two communities. Despite the manifest anti-Hindu nature of the riots, which were instigated at the behest of the Muslim leaders of Bengal, in cahoots with the British establishment, the author of Red Pamphlet, Ibrahim Khan, was released on a personal bond with a mere warning that criminal proceedings against him would be reinstituted should he publish further copies of. An extract from the proceedings of the 19th of March 1907 sheds light on the role played by Nawab Salimullah. Here's another extract from the proceedings of the 16th of April 1907 which shows the one-sided nature of this so-called riot.
After a few amendments, the bill was passed in May 1909, and the Indian Councils Act of 1909 received royal assent on 25 May 1909.179. Muslim separatism was constitutionally cemented in the political psyche of Bharat. I will chart the journey of the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League between 1907 and 1909. I will also present select legislative debates that took place in England and Bharat on the Minto-Morley reforms. Rai's deportation by the British increased his importance in the eyes of the public. At one point it was feared that the Sikh units of the British Indian Army would revolt against the government.
To purge the Congress of the extremists, in particular Tilak, and their influence, the venue of the 1907 session of the Congress was shifted from Nagpur to Surat. Ironically, this was a message to extremists to either fall in line or leave the Congress. The removal of the nationalists from the Congress had, at best, resulted in the cleansing of dissenting voices within the Congress. After the tapering down of the armed side of the Wahhabi movement, the revolutionary societies established in the early 1900s presented the most potent armed resistance to the British government. The activities of these societies, which were spread over several parts of Bharat, received significant support from Bhartiyas residing abroad. To draw young talent and train them in revolutionary activities, Verma offered scholarships annually to 3 Bhartiya students to pursue their education abroad. The Press Act was passed on the 8th of June 1908 to curb the spread of seditious literature. In December 1908, on recommendations from the governments of Bengal and of Eastern Bengal and Assam, Minto ordered.
Even as the Council's bill was being debated in the British Parliament and in the Imperial Legislative Council in India in 1909, the year witnessed a spate of bomb explosions, assassination attempts and assassinations. Here is a summary of the sequence of events for an understanding of the circumstances and motivations that shaped the Minto-Morley reforms. 50. Until 1908, the issue of appointment of an Indian member to the Viceroy's Executive Council remained unresolved. In the end, Advocate General S.P. Sinha was appointed, based on his track record, among other things, one of the other things being his complexion. He was chosen over Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee because he was, comparatively white, and was, more in touch with European society. The League accused Morley of being influenced by Hindus to sacrifice the interests of minorities. The Congress, of course, welcomed Morley's suggestion since the proposal struck a balance between Muslim expectations and the Congress's position. Gokhale was of the view that Morley's proposal was not alive to the real divides between Hindus and Muslims.
Syed Ali Imam, unification demands absorption and obliteration of old landmarks of differences and divergences. Aurangzeb saw, no less than his great-grandfather, the political necessity of unification. He adopted, however, the desperate and hazardous method of religious intolerance and forcible conversion. With the weakening of administrative control, the Musalman found himself isolated. New Hindu powers rose in rebellion round the tottering throne of the Mughal. The nationalists held that the British colonizer's race consciousness and his position as the colonizer would never allow him to treat Bhartiyas as a people capable of governing themselves using Western institutions. I could be accused of hindsight bias, but the fact of the matter is that for the most part, the extremists, nationalists could see right through the coloniality of the British establishment as well as that of the moderates. After the Amritsar session of the League, a long campaign of protests by Muslims began all over the country. Syed Amir Ali was active in London and advocated strongly for the Muslim cause.
The Congress had failed to understand the implications of the Simla deputation of October 1906. It also underestimated the will of the Muslim League to ensure that its demand for separate electorates be granted. The Muslim League achieved a major victory on its journey to re-establish Muslim state power in the Bhartiya subcontinent. Some in this country leaned to the opinion that the riots ought to suspend all suggestions and talk of reform. They held that such a withdrawal from a line of policy suggested by the Governor-General would be construed as a triumph for the party of sedition. Earl Percy, whatever defects there may be in the machinery of administration, men of all parties in this country feel in the handful of men entrusted the burden of British rule in India. The real difficulty, the impossibility, lies in the two facts which are at the root of the Indian problem: the establishment, sooner or later, of parliamentary institutions, and the substitution for autocratic rule of the system of government by majorities.
Any attempt to govern India on the principle of government by majorities must mean the government of the strong by the weak. If we induce them to believe that the changes adumbrated today, or any changes that we can ever introduce, will carry us a single step further in the direction of the Congress party, There had been disturbances in eastern Bengal and in the Punjab. The original cause had been the failure of the educated classes of Hindus to obtain the slightest recognition by constitutional methods of their demands for reform. The danger was that from the Himalayas to the plains of India, if the people found that they could obtain no redress for their grievances by using constitutional methods, they would follow the most advanced leaders. O'Grady, how much better it would have been if the policy which had been declared that night had been declared 5 years ago. O'Grady, how much better it would have been if the policy which had been declared that night had been declared 5 years ago.
Smeaton, the late Viceroy, Lord Curzon, unfortunately did not know, and never learnt, what kind of people he had to govern. There had been a long series of most regrettable incidents during the last 2 or 3 years of the late Viceroy's term of office. Smeaton, the Official Secrets Bill and the officialization of the universities were untimely measures and irritated the educated classes. Maharaja of Nabha drew attention to the riots in Punjab and the British administration's deliberate policy to look the other way. On the 21st of December 1866, the murderous outrages in Panchbi Bill was moved by one of the members of the Governor-General's Council. This brutality was part of the larger organized violence being committed against Europeans, Hindus and Sikhs by the Wahhabis since the mid-1800s. Some men believed fanatics had frequently murdered and attempted to murder servants of the Queen and other persons whose religion differed from that of the offender. President considered that its introduction was urgently required in the Panchbi. In former days, when His Excellency was Chief Commissioner of the Panchbi, assaults were continually made on Hind traders.
What an extraordinary theory that the outrage was not the result of religion's antipathies, a theory which it was the duty of the magistrate to verify by the facts of the case. When no provision is made for other communities, it does not seem at all fair to favor a particular community by giving it special privileges. No other community in India can be found more educated, more enlightened and more advanced than the Parsis. In Bengal there are now 3 members so elected, in the future there will be 8. In the United Provinces the increase will be from 4 to 10, and in Bombay from 3 to 8. The plan of Hindus and Mohammedans voting together in a mixed and composite electorate would have secured the chance of returning their own representatives in their due proportion. But the Mohammedans protested that the Hindus would elect a pro-Hindu upon it. The government of India doubted whether our plan would work, and we have abandoned it.
Dada boy, it is a mistake to suppose that the bulk of the Indian Mohammedans are separated from their Hindu congeners by any sharp cleavage of race and tradition. Where there are deserving Mohammedans, they have as good a chance as Hindus. Gokhale agreed with concept of communal electorates, and in particular for Muslims. He suggested only a minor modification to the method proposed by the British government for a supplementary electorate instead of a separate one for Muslims. The idea of 2 watertight compartments for Hindus and Mohammedans separately will not promote the best interests of the country. The existence of the government is not to depend upon the votes of non-official members, neither are its members to be drawn from those who are in a majority in the councils. It is necessary that the new arrangements should be inaugurated with the utmost goodwill from all sections of the people. I earnestly appeal to my countrymen, both Hindu and Mohammedan, to exercise special mutual forbearance at this juncture and meet each other halfway.
Peers, the virulence of the native press appears to have been directed more against our claim to historical and political importance. From that promise we cannot go back, we ought not to go back, and we will not go back. The only other province that has advanced a recommendation at the present moment is Madras. Gokhale's views in support of the reforms is representative of the view of the Indian reformers, or the moderates. Differences between the Hindu and the Muslim communities were vast, warranting a separate electorate system. The Muslim League and the British government were clearly on the same page with respect to the practical application of the two-nation theory. I was prepared to accept that, and the Hindus also in India in a most broad-minded, kindly, and willing manner were also prepared to accept the idea that a certain number of members of the Legislative Council should be Musalmans. But there is a difference when you propose to select these members by a strictly sectarian vote.
I cannot imagine a Liberal Secretary of State put in a more difficult position than he was in dealing with the anarchy and crime that broke out in India. Why I still more and more object to this system is that in the second page of the memorandum it is stated that one of the objects of this bill is the election of a certain proportion of members by popular vote. There is no such thing as a Muslim nationality. You might as well talk about Baptist. The danger that lies before us is that we are face to face with a calamitous experiment. I beg right hon, gentlemen, not to awake the fanaticism of the Hindu and of India. Today the Mohammedans are the most loyal of the population of India. If we throw them over and put them under the heel of the Hindus, you will have the Mohammedans just as disloyal as large sections of the Hindus are.
I do not hesitate to say that to undo the partition would shake the British Empire in India to its foundations. It is an absurd thing to say to a Mohammedan, you shall have a converted Hindu, who is unrecognizable from the Hindus around you, to be your representative. I do not know of anything more likely to please them at a less cost than this. So many subjects are excluded from the powers of these bodies. There were international considerations in the creation of separate electorates for Hindus and Muslims in India. Mohammedans have a just claim to a substantial share in any political privileges which may be granted to the peoples of India. The differences between the Hindu and the community of the memorialists are so great that it is a mistake to regard them as forming a part of the Hindus. The government having come to the conclusion that the Mohammedans ought to be granted representation in excess of their actual numbers, it remains to be decided how this change is to be brought about.
How the government propose to reconcile their action with their promises passes my comprehension. May I add that the leaders of Mohammedan thought would not recognize a representative who is elected by others than Mohammedans. I beg to move. I think anybody who reads these telegrams must realize that the Mohammedans throughout India are at present suffering under a sense of grievous wrong and of grievous injustice. They consider that the pledges which were given to them in the most explicit language by the Viceroy and the Secretary of State are being broken. I have no reasons for espousing the cause of the Mohammedans except this, that I believe, in the first place, that the Minto-Mawli reforms and the issue of communal, separate electorates for Muslims were the political subjects of attention from October until December 1909. The advent of modern democracy, constitutionalism and the European state apparatus merely provided weak safety valves, like communal electorates. Ultimately, the partition of 1947 proved the futility of such safety valves.
The responsibility for enforcement of repressive measures must rest with those whose insanity has forced their adoption on the state. It should be the imperative duty of peaceful citizens to cooperate with the officers of government in putting out the fire of sedition and anarchy. We realize that the presence of the British in India is the best guarantee for the equitable protection of Muslim interests. The League saw the British as a strategic necessity to prevent Hindus from reclaiming state power. Most of the Hindu elites sought continued ties with the British. The net result was the alienation, marginalization and subjugation of those Hindu voices that sought spiritual, cultural and political decolonization. Within an hour of assuming office, Harding claimed to have become acutely aware of the communal consequence of the partition. He said, 17 Within an hour of being sworn in as the Viceroy and Governor-General, I had an interesting lesson as to the relative value of British and Indian troops for the preservation of order.
Wedderburn was of the view that the watchwords of the Congress ought to be hope, conciliation, and united effort. In his presidential speech at Allahabad, Wedderburn was of the view that the watchwords of the Congress ought to be hope, conciliation, and united effort. On the question of conciliation between Hindus and Muslims, he suggested that the League and the Congress must work together to achieve this. The Muslim League insisted that Urdu be treated as the lingua franca of India, instead of giving space to Hindi and other Bharatiya languages. The apotheosis of Shivaji gives us a foretaste, as it were, of what the poor Mohammedans have to expect under Hindu hegemony. The events leading to the annulment of the partition of Bengal must be appreciated. The decision to reunify Bengal was the product of a convergence of multiple interests. The king wanted to grant his Indian subjects a suitable boon or concession to mark his visit.
Harding agreed with Crewe that even if the king's proposal had to be given effect, there was no question of restoring the position of Bengal to what it was prior to Curzon's time. This meant that if push came to shove, the two Bengals would be reunited under a lieutenant governor or a governor in council, whereas Assam, Bihar and Orissa would have a chief commissioner each. Jenkins thought the transfer of the capital from Calcutta to Delhi would mark a new era in the history of India. The transfer of the capital from Calcutta to Delhi, 2. The creation of United Bengal into a presidency with a governor in council appointed from England. Bihar and Orissa into a lieutenant governorship with a legislative council and a capital at Patna. The restoration of the chief commissionership of Assam. The secret was known to only 12 people in India during the 6 months that preceded the Darbar on December 11. Harding recognized that the grievances of Bengali Hindus were compounded by the creation of separate electorates for Muslims under the Indian Councils Act of 1909.
Curzon questioned the constitutionality of the declarations made by the King Emperor. Bangladeshi infiltration to turn Assam into a Lebensraum must be understood. Maulvi Badruddin Haider Khan Bahadur was chairman of the reception committee. He portended the coming of a global Muslim movement and the participation of Muslims from Bharat. Nawab Salimullah's presidential speech on the transfer of the capital to Delhi and the annulment of the partition of Bengal. May the heart of Islam be resuscitated and vivified even as the historic city of Delhi will come to new life in this restoration to her past dignity. I am not one of those who used to look upon the partition, in itself, as the only panacea for all our evils.
The real cause of the Bengali opposition to the partition lay far deeper than in the plausible excuse of outraged sentiments. The Musalmans naturally refused to join the agitation because it was so violently opposed to their feelings of loyalty. The annulment of the partition had all the appearance of a ready concession to the clamors of an utterly seditious agitation. The Musalmans of East Bengal, the annulment means the deprivation of those splendid opportunities at self-improvement. It is the manner in which the change has been brought about, without even warning or consulting us, which adds to the poignancy of our grief. The All India Muslim League places on record its deep sense of regret and disappointment at the annulment of the partition. The Muslim League condemned the war against the Ottoman Empire. A Red Crescent Society was established in Calcutta and London to collect funds for Turkey. The Delhi bomb attack would feature prominently in the 1912 session of the Congress.
The recent treatment of Islam by Europe has turned the scales. The Russian sacrilege on the sacred mausoleum of Imam Raza at Mesht in Persia exasperated the religious feelings of Muslims throughout the world. Italy invaded Tripoli, a country peopled wholly by Muslims of Arab descent and living peacefully under Turkish rule. While Turkey was still fighting Italy, she was treacherously attacked on all sides. Ahmed, treat your Muslim brethren with sympathy and please do not run away with the idea that all Muslims are hopelessly reprobate. Muhammad, what I want to impress upon my Hindu brethren is to have a wider outlook, accept facts as facts, and handle the situation with delicacy and toleration. Muhammad, if the Muslim community have any grievances against the Congress, I invite them to come here and ventilate them on this our common platform. Gandhi, I could not keep back my honest thoughts from this great gathering of my countrymen. I may have made a mistake, but I felt a call to speak out. On the Turkish situation, Mudhulkar said, Brother delegates, before I proceed to touch upon those questions which demand our immediate consideration, I have, on your behalf and of my humble self, to give expression to the profound sorrow and sympathy which the Hindus and all non-Muslim Indians feel.
The absence of a pushback to the Congress's approach at the Bankipur session is evident from the fact that Lala Lajpat Rai too was constrained to denounce the cult of bomb. The sixth session of the League was held in Lucknow on the 22nd to the 23rd of March 1913. Jinnah, who attended the council meeting of December 1912 as a non-member, attended the Lucknow session as a member. On the 1st of July 1913, before the Muslim League could intervene, the portion of the mosque sought to be acquired for road widening was demolished under police protection. On the 3rd of August 1913, under the supervision of District Magistrate Tyler, the police fired at Muslim protesters, which resulted in the death of at least 25 protesters. This incident resulted in the Muslim leadership questioning the community's dependence on and loyalty towards the British. The defeat of Turkey, while it has caused intense grief and depression to the Islamic world, has also brought Muslims closer together. The Musulmans have realized the full import of the grave crisis in their history, which has roused in them a feeling of brotherhood.
The Indian Musulmans fully recognize the danger to England, with all its interests spread over the face of the whole world, to hint that she should thoughtlessly involve herself in a bloody war. All that they have urged was that England, as the sovereign power of millions of Muslim subjects, should, out of regard for their sentiments, endeavor to see that Turkey obtained fair and just treatment in the councils of Europe. Argov points out that the extent of the Congress's subservience to Muslim opinion was evident from the fact that its Muslim members threatened to boycott the Madras session if Lala Lajpat Rai presided over it. That the Congress was still the stronghold of the moderates who did not want the extremists back in their fold was demonstrated by Firoz Shah Mehta's stout refusal of Annie Besant's proposal to amend the Congress's constitution to bring back the extreme. Bharat turned out to be Germany's greatest disappointment since, instead of an uprising, the country saw the Congress pledge its wholehearted and unswerving support to the British. The Congress thanked the government for sending Indian troops as a mark of its trust in Indians, and sought self-government in return.
India must have a system of government modelled on the lines of the Commonwealth of Australia or the United States of America. In this constitution all will find a place, the Englishman as well as the Indian, the prince as well as the peasant, and all communities. The 1915 annual sessions of the Congress and the League in Bombay reflected the changing dynamics in both organizations. The League's council met in Lucknow in November 1915 and accepted Jinnah's proposal to hold its annual session in Bombay. Both the Congress and the League passed resolutions to the effect that they would appoint their respective committees to prepare a joint scheme of post-war constitutional reforms. Jinnah said that in view of the present situation, when questions of the readjustment and reconstruction of the government of India would soon be taken up, it was desirable that a committee consisting of responsible leaders of the Mohammedans should be appointed to formulate a scheme of reforms. The committee shall submit its report and scheme to the Council of the All India Muslim League to be presented at its next annual session.
Jinnah's primary goal behind staying in the Congress until 1920 was to advance the cause of his community. Jinnah convinced the Congress that the Muslim community's trust in the Congress would increase if the latter were to accept separate electorates for Muslims. Annie Besant founded the Home Rule League with the support of Tilak in September 1916. Tilak had already launched the Indian Home Rule League in April 1916. In any scheme of imperial federation, India should be given through her chosen representatives a place similar to that of the self-governing dominions. The right to carry arms should be granted to Indians on the same conditions as to Europeans. Commissions in the army should be given to Indian youths under conditions similar to those applicable to Europeans.
Jinnah, Besant, Tilak, Bhupendranath Basu, Wazir Hassan, Motilal Nehru and Tej Bahadur Saprau had to intervene to get the parties to agree. The League agreed to 30% and 40% representation for Muslims in the legislatures of the United Provinces and Bengal, respectively. Effectively, by acceding to this demand, the Congress had bought Hindu-Muslim unity at a steep price to secure self. The conference marked a great step forward in our political evolution and disclosed a substantial identity of views between Hindus and Mohammedans. The efforts of the older generation to awaken the consciousness of the people have produced their inevitable result. A new generation has arisen with new thoughts and new ideas, impatient of its dependent position and claiming its rights as free citizens of the British Empire.
India's contribution to the war has largely increased since 1914. Gentlemen, India now demands that after the war things shall not revert to their original condition, but that she shall occupy a position worthy of herself as a member of the imperial family. She is not asking for rewards in return for her loyalty, but having fought in defense of human freedom, she expects that her own sons will no longer be denied their birthright as freemen. The slow deterioration which is taking.
The Hindus and Muslims have agreed to make a united demand for self-government. Neither the Parsis nor the Mohammedans of India owe any temporal allegiance either to the Shah of Persia or the Sultan of Turkey. The All India Congress Committee and the representatives of the Muslim League who recently met in conference at Calcutta have after 2 days deliberations in one voice resolved to make a joint demand for a representative government in India. The Lord Buddha, the Lord Muhammad and the Lord Christ were coloured men. Have we excluded the colonials from India because they could not talk or write some language of which they could know nothing? The Indians resent the indignity to which they, the subjects of the King Emperor, are subjected. Tilak, until we have home rule we cannot be armed as we should be. Home rule has a bad odor in India and home rule has a bad odor in England.
The Muslim demands of communal electorates and communal veto on legislation were accepted by the Congress, the extremists included. The session marked the re-entry of extremists such as Tilak and Pal into the Congress, owing to the efforts of Annie Besant. The Lucknow sessions of the Congress and the League heralded a new chapter in Hindu-Muslim relations. To mount pressure on the government by gathering support from the masses, Annie Besant and Tilak vigorously advocating home rule. India was allowed to participate in the Imperial War Conference held in London in March 1917. Home rule movement was more forceful than Swadeshi movement. Even Jinnah joined Besant's Home Rule League and led its Bombay branch.
Montagu used the words, responsible government, instead of self-government. There was no clarity as to the time frame the British had in mind for the grant of self-government to Bharat. The trigger for the riots was the slaughter of cows by Muslims. Tilak's procession to Delhi to see me was a veritable triumphant one. This reflected in the 32nd annual session of the Congress held in Calcutta. I do not oppose the immediate introduction of home rule in India. But I do not think that it is a practical demand. Some compromise has therefore to be made with those that are in power and also with our opponents.
Interestingly, Tilak also moved a resolution demanding release of the Ali brothers who had been under detention for their pro-caliphate activities. Tilak, the whole Mohammedan community was prepared to stand guarantee for the good conduct of these men. The CID and the executive government said that the men could not be released. The men were not originally detained for this but for something else. They could not sacrifice their religious scruples to their political allegiance. The Congress, even under extremists such as Besant, Tilak and Pal, supported the pro-caliphate activities of the Ali brothers and others. The potential impact of encouraging pan-Islamism and the divided loyalties it engendered on the social fabric of Bharat did not seem to feature much even in the calculus of leaders like Tilak. Instead, Christian justifications were invoked by Tilak to justify a pan-Islamic sentiment and to demand the release of its proponents. In his address, the Raja of Mahmudabad defended pan-Islamism and support for the caliphate by Muslims while remaining subjects of the British Empire.
The All India Muslim League belongs the glory of burning the great truth into the hearts of Indian Muslimans. The cause of the country is too great, too sacred to be through any misfortune. It is in the spirit of an unshakable devotion to our faith and our country that we have assembled here. League, countries, every inch of which is sacred to the Muslimans, have been made battlegrounds in consequence of this world conflagration. League condemns the silence of responsible Hindu leaders at the occurrences in Bihar and Chaurari. League cannot too strongly urge upon the attention of the government that the course followed by Muhammad Ali and his brother is having a profoundly disquieting effect upon the community at large. All India Muslim League strongly urges upon the government to set free Maulana Mahmud ul Hasan, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Maulana Hasrat Mohani and all the other Muslim internees. The League does resolve, in response to the universal wishes of the Muslimans of India, to initiate a campaign of constitutional agitation.
Montagu proposed the creation of yet another organization that would function as a safety valve. The Montfort report identified the growing sense of confidence on the part of Indians that they too were entitled to exercise the right of self-determination. The report recognized that the Home Rule movement gave formal expression to the demand for self-government. We have every reason to hope that as the result of this process, India's connection with the empire will be confirmed by the wishes of her people. As power is given to the people of a province or of a dominion to manage their own local affairs, their attachment becomes the stronger to the empire. We are not prepared, without experience of their results, to effect like changes in the government of India. It is desirable to make the Indian Legislative Council more truly representative of Indian opinion. The government of India must remain wholly responsible to Parliament, and saving such responsibility, its authority in essential matters must remain indisputable, pending experience of the effect of changes now to be introduced in the provinces.
We consider any system of communal electorates as a very serious hindrance to the development of the self-governing principle. A minority which is given special representation owing to its weak and backward state is positively encouraged to settle down into a feeling of satisfied security. The give and take which is the essence of political life is lacking. Mohammedans regard separate representation and communal electorates as their only adequate safeguards. The Montfort report did not deem it fit to recommend separate electorates for any other community except the Sikhs. Grant of separate electorates to the Sikhs, the non-Brahmins of Madras or the Lingayat community would have been detrimental to the integrity of the Indic fold. Until 1919, the Sikhs did not have a separate political representation from Hindus. Singh traces the origins of this demand in 1919 to the creation of a Sikh reform association called Khalsa Diwan.
There should be communal representation for Muhammadans in most provinces and also for Sikhs in the Punjab. The report presented the British government's overall vision of India's future 349. We cannot say that the form of responsibility which will be reached in India will exactly correspond to that attained by the dominions. The dominating factor in the intermediate process must be the rate at which the provinces can move towards responsible government. We cannot predict what kind of agency India will wish to maintain in London once she has attained the status of full partnership in the empire. Montfort report, Parliament should be in a position to form a wise and independent judgment. We suggest machinery by means of which at regular stages the element of responsibility can be continuously enlarged. Time limit must be fixed for granting full responsible government to India. Full fiscal freedom must be given to India at once.
Pandit Gokaran Nath Mishra's Declaration of Indian Rights included the right to bear arms. Banerjee, who was satisfied with the recommendations of the Montfort report, seceded from the Congress to found the All India Moderates Conference. R.C. Majumdar was of the view that the founding of the All India Moderates Conference was the handiwork of Montagu. In his welcome speech, the chairman of the reception committee, Ajmal Khan, spoke of Gandhi's support for the Khilafat movement. He said, "No assembly which claims to represent the whole of India can ignore questions so profoundly affecting 70 millions of her population." He added, "It has been our painful duty to observe the disastrous results of ignoring this great fact. But for the entry of Turkey on the side of Germany, this war would have ended long before. If all the powers of the world combine to force a Khalifa on Muslimans, the humblest of them will not follow him." India remained unshaken equally in her loyalty to the King Emperor and in her resolve to do her utmost to help the empire till the end.
India's Congress League scheme of 1916 calls for a measure of self-government. This should be judged in the light of the principle of self-determination. The proposals of reform have been elaborated by Mr. Montagu and Lord Chelmsford. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad objected to Montfort report, which were jointly prepared with the Congress at the special session held in Bombay. The revolt of the Sharif of Makkah has endangered the future of our holy places, and the world of Islam is watching with sorrow and anxiety the effects of the Sharif's declaration of independence. All questions relating to the Khilafat and the protection of our holy places are intimately bound up with the vital articles of our faith. Gandhi's support for the Khilafat movement was acknowledged by Ajmal Khan in his welcome speech at the Congress's 33rd annual session in 1918 in Delhi.
From 1894 to 1914, Gandhi fought against apartheid and racism in South Africa. Gandhi remained a British loyalist in the same mold as the moderates. He actively recruited men on behalf of the British to support its war efforts. The report was commissioned by Chelmsford with the approval of Montagu on the 10th of December 1917. It was submitted by the committee to the British government on the 15th of April 1918. The report sought to give the impression that the revolutionary movement was the attempt of the Chitpavan Brahmins to regain their lost power. Two bills were introduced in the Imperial Legislative Council on the 6th of February 1919 pursuant to the Rowlatt Report. One was a temporary measure, a stopgap arrangement upon lapsation of the Defence of India Act, and the other a permanent one. The Congress and the League protested, saying the proposed law could be misused against legitimate political expression and dissent. Gandhi formed the Satyagraha Sabha in Bombay in February 1919 along with leaders such as Vallabhbhai Patel and Saro.
While Gandhi was busy drawing up the rules of an ideal satyagraha, Punjab was on the boil under Lieutenant Governor Michael O'Dwyer. O'Dwyer was keen on stamping out all political activity, peaceful or otherwise, which in his opinion undermined British rule. He did not want the Congress to contaminate Punjab with its agitation for self-government and its opposition to the Rowlatt Act. Brigadier General Dyer ordered his troops to open fire at the densest sections of the crowd, which numbered anywhere between 10,000 and 20,000. More would have been killed but for the fact that the passageway leading to the Bagh was too narrow. Brigadier General Dyer had no compunction in stating before the Hunter Committee that he was limited only by the paucity of ammunition. Only after the withdrawal of martial law did the rest of the country become aware of the tragedy and the reign of terror in Punjab. There were vehement demands for recall of the Viceroy and impeachment of the Lieutenant Governor of Punjab. Both reports generally agreed that the police and the army were justified in firing upon the mobs in Punjab and that the unrest was caused by Gandhi's satyagraha.
Government of India Bill, based significantly, if not entirely, on the Montford Report, was introduced in the House of Commons on the 22nd of May 1919. The purpose is to understand the colonial establishment's reading of the situation in Bharat and the need for the Montford reforms. The Government of India Bill was introduced by Montagu on the 22nd of May 1919. It was passed in the House of Lords on the 18th of December 1919 and received royal assent on the 23rd of December 1919. The danger is not past, it exists, it is not something that is finished, it threatens those who govern India, those who wish her well, those who desire for her peace and progress, speak in a critical time in her history.
Indo-British Association has carried on a ceaseless campaign against reforms. Rowlatt Act was throughout India a very unpopular act. Defence of India Act has helped to defend the young educated men of Bengal. All the cases in Bengal have been investigated by a commission of inquiry consisting of Mr. Justice Beechcroft and Sir Narayan Chandavarkar. In all the cases which they have investigated, they have found the government was justified in the action they took except in 6 cases. Montagu: I am more than ever convinced that we must now proceed without delay to the introduction of the promised bill for the alteration of the Government of India. The vital point of Indian reform today is the transference of power from the bureaucracy to the people. There's, believe me, a passion for self-government. You must transfer the power from the officials to the people.
If that is the only alternative to Diaki holds the field. You cannot put before the world a scheme elaborated over the signature of the Viceroy and the Secretary of State, and then do what is called in India, whittle down the scheme. Thomas Bennett: we are being told that the moderates in India have no real loyalty towards the government. Instead of the rally of the moderates to our side, the rally of the moderates has been to the extremists. Bennett: the most harmful thing that has been done lately is the attempt to discredit the loyalty of the moderates in India. The views of both moderates and extremists coincide to such an extent as to be prejudicial to the claims of Indian politicians to manage their own affairs. Unless we satisfy the moderates of India that we trust them and wish to work with them and they with us, our day in India is done.
The Viceroy appealed to the princes and chiefs, who could lend valuable assistance by guarding their states against a lawless and malicious spirit. The debates make it clear that the British government continued to see loyal allies in the moderates even in 1919. The so-called rapprochement between the moderates and the extremists achieved in the 1916 session had reverted to its broken status of 1907. The moderates contend that the Secretary of State for India was impressed with the moderation of their proposals. The extremists can well answer this contention saying, "Had we not agitated for full Swaraj, even this much could not have been granted to us. The dispute has already been settled, for Lokmanya Tilak Maharaj has pronounced his verdict saying, accept what has been given to you, and keep up a constitutional agitation for a full measure of self-government." Nehru, it is impossible for one part of the nation to stand aloof while the other part is suffering from a serious grievance. The entry of Turkey in the war was a most momentous event from the Indian Muslims' point of view. Muslim India, nay United India, demands that full effect be given to assurances.
This Congress gratefully welcomes the resolution of the All India Muslim League recommending the discontinuance of the slaughter of cows in India on the Bakr Eid festival, removing as it does a cause of great offence to the universal Hindu sentiment, and recognizes the resolution as one of the greatest steps on the part of Indian Muslimans towards complete unity between Hindus and Mohammedans, and trusts that the Hindus will fully reciprocate the good feelings of their Mohammedan brethren indicated by their generous resolution. Muslim leaders such as Sayyid Amir Ali, Nawab Abdul Latif and Sayyid Ahmad Khan saw British rule both as the will of Allah. The Khilafat movement is typically assigned the period between 1919 and 1921 in the popular discourse. The movement's contribution to the reality of the two-nation theory and the consequent solidification of the idea of Pakistan defines the metes and bounds of my discussion. The theory of two caliphates is similar to the theory of two kingdoms, spiritual and temporal, which formed the basis of the Protestant Reformation. Unlike the Pope, the Khalifa or the Caliph who heads the Khilafat or the Caliphate is the custodian of all religious and temporal power on earth for all Sunni Muslims.
The Ottoman Empire acquired the caliphal mantle in 1517 after its conquest of the Mamluk-ruled Egypt. By the mid-1700s, the Ottoman Empire was the last surviving hope of Islam. By the 1870s, the Friday khutbah in mosques in Bharat was read in the name of the Ottoman Sultan. In May 1913, a year before the First World War broke out, the Anjuman-i-Khudam-i-Kaaba was founded in Delhi with the support of the Ali brothers. The ostensible object of the Anjuman was to campaign for the protection of Muslim holy places from the effects of the wars being fought. The primary contribution of the Anjuman was to bring together the Western-educated Muslim political leadership and the traditional youth. Until Turkey's involvement in the war, the hope among Muslims was that European Christendom would fight within itself and weaken, leaving Turkey better off. Turkey had sent its emissaries to thank and reward pan-Islamists in Bharat for their efforts during the Tripolitan and Balkan Wars. Efforts were made by the pan-Islamists in Bharat to exert Turkey to remain neutral in the war or support the British, to make life easier for Muslims in Bharat.
This would, in turn, allow the Muslims to freely support the Caliphate without being bogged down by their loyalty to the British. Prior to the internment of the Ali brothers in May 1915, Gandhi had established communication with them. Gandhi realized early enough in South Africa that there was no genuine friendship between the Hindus and the Muslims. If all had the same belief about all matters of religion, there would be only one religion in the world. Britain, France, Russia and Italy had concluded secret treaties among themselves, under which, in the event of Allied victory in the war, the Ottoman Empire would be partitioned into four spheres of influence. The Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire in June 1916 seriously undermined the cause of pan-Islamism, since the epicenter of the revolt was the holiest of places for
Tilak, Annie Besant and Gandhi supported the League's demand for release of the Ali brothers. Gandhi, who attended the League's session, supported the resolution demanding the release of the Ali brothers. The year 1917 was a turning point in the war for another reason. Thanks to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, the burden on the rest of the Allied powers increased. In July 1918, Gandhi declared his intention to engage the government in a duel to secure the release of the Ali brothers. His efforts in this direction made him popular among the Muslim community. In April 1918, Gandhi once again wrote to the Viceroy against the backdrop of the Delhi Imperial War Conference. The League's session saw a huge presence of ulema, who put their stamp of religious approval on the League's Khilaf demands. The chairman of the reception committee, Dr. M.A. Ansari, reminded the British Crown of its wartime pledges to the Muslim community regarding saving the temporal power of Islam. He demanded that all non-Muslim control be removed from the Jazirat-ul-Arab and that the suzerainty of the
To us, the Muslims all over the world, the fate of Turkey is bound with problems of deep concern. We cannot forget that Turkey raises, for all Muslims, the questions of the Khilafat and the protections of our holy places. It is obvious that we cannot depend on British statesmen to represent the Muslim cause. Maulana Abdul Bari objected to the display of the Union Jack at the venue. The anger against the British establishment was clearly simmering. Jinnah and Nabiullah cautioned against the use of intemperate language. The significance of the League's 1918 session, its tone, and the import of its resolutions, were not lost on the British Indian government. The Khilafat agitation and non-cooperation movement from January 1919 up to the time of the Nagpur sessions of the Congress and the League in December 1920. Maulana Abdul Bari issued a fatwa to the effect that all Muslims were duty-bound to contribute to the restoration of the Khilafat in Ottoman hands.
Gandhi and Maulana Abdul Bari reached out to each other. The convergence of interests between Gandhi and Maulana Bari no doubt led to a powerful countrywide mobilization of the masses. The government realized that although Gandhi's agitation was primarily aimed at the Rowlatt Act on the face of it, the support of the Khilafatists was contributing significantly to the agitation. There was no attempt to include Muslim representation from Bharat as part of the Bharatiya delegation at the Paris Peace Conference. While the Muslims in Bharat were agitating for restoration of the Ottoman Caliphate, the homegrown Young Turks movement wanted to replace Ottoman monarchy with a constitutional democracy. This exposed a fundamental problem at the heart of the Gandhi-Bari Pact. Gandhi's satyagraha was non-violent by definition, whereas Bari's religious beliefs required the waging. On the 11th of November 1919, the Bombay Committee was renamed the Central Khilafat Committee of India, Bombay. On 23 and the 24th of November 1919, a joint All India Khilafat conference was held in Delhi at the behest of the Muslim League's president, Fazlul Haq. It was resolved that the British celebrations of the Allied victory in the war and British goods would both be boycotted.
Ajmal Khan went to the extent of saying that notwithstanding the continuing issue of the Khilafat, the reforms must be welcomed. He echoed the Gandhi-Bari Pact on cow slaughter in view of the Hindu support for the Khilafat agitation. Khan regretted that the Bharatiya delegation did not have a single Muslim representative. Core object of the CKC was to secure for Turkey a just and honorable peace. Reports started emerging that Turkey would lose Istanbul as well as the Hagia Sophia, which would revert to being a church. Reports started emerging that Turkey would lose Istanbul as well as the Hagia Sophia, which would revert to being a church. Peace terms between Allied powers and Turkey were announced on the 11th of May 1920. Muslims found them outrageous. CKC released its manifesto for non-cooperation on the 28th of May 1920 in Bombay.
On the very day the non-cooperation campaign was launched, Tilak passed away. Apart from his death being a monumental loss to the country, it also meant that Gandhi had a freer hand in steering the future of the Congress. Promotion of Swadeshi goods and boycott of British goods were also resolved. This culminated in the establishment of the National University, or Jamia Millia Islamia, on the 30th of October 1920. The government hastened the grant of university status to MAO College with effect from the 1st of December 1920, with the Raja of Mahmudabad as the Vice-Chancellor and the Begum of Bhopal as the Chancellor. The boycott of the elections by the non-cooperators saw a significant number of vacancies in several constituencies, in particular Muslim. Jinnah. There is no doubt that it makes a declaration of complete independence. He pointed out that the language of the proposed resolution implied complete independence. He also objected to the practicality of the peaceful and legitimate means proposed by Gandhi.
Jinnah, I do not say that we should not believe in sentiments, nor do I say that sentiment does not play an important part. But remember that you are changing your constitution. You cannot pass a constitution this year and change it next year. The constitution, if it is changed, must be changed at least with this object in view that you see at least quarter of a century ahead of you. Is the constitution of the Indian National Congress to be changed because there are some people? Gandhi proposed an open-ended resolution, which hinted at complete independence from the British. Jinnah was clear that even if the goal identified by Gandhi was indeed complete independence, to hope to achieve it through peaceful and legitimate means was impractical and strategically unsound. Jinnah quit the Congress as well as the Home Rule League after the Nagpur session. Ideal approach to deal with the colonizer may have been to aim for complete independence from the start.
This Congress, while reaffirming the resolution on non-violent non-cooperation passed at the special session of the Congress at Calcutta. The Congress congratulates the nation upon the progress made so far in working the program of non-cooperation. This Congress appeals to all people in government employment, pending the call of the nation for resignation of their service, to help the national cause. This Congress calls upon public associations to advance Hindu-Muslim unity, and the Hindu delegates of this Congress call upon the leading Hindus to settle all disputes between Brahmins and non-Brahmins. This Congress recognizes the great economic necessity for the protection of cattle, and urges upon the people of India to do their best to achieve this. Gandhi's support for the Khilafat strengthened a pre-existing pan-Islamist undercurrent. The founding of the Jew in 1919, with its goals bluntly identified and spelt out, is proof of this. What ought to have been led by the League for the CKC was being led by the Congress under the Mahatma.
Maulana Shabbir Usmani was one of the founding members of Jamia Millia Islamia University and founder of the pro-Pakistan political party Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam. In 1946, Usmani would furnish a Quranic basis for the establishment of Pakistan by citing the distinction between Momin, believer, and Kafir, infidel. Ansari's Quranic justification for the non-cooperation movement and the JUHS Sharia-compliant resolutions that it is both factually incorrect and embarrassingly ignorant to treat the non-cooperation movement as a secular anti-colonial movement whose intention was to free Bharat from the clutches of the British. From an internal perspective, it was clear that the ulema were not happy being led by Gandhi. Not only was he non-Muslim, but he also forbade the use of violence. The other external development that had a direct bearing on the issue of Khilafat was the Turkish national movement under Kemal Ataturk.
By August 1921, the Mopla riots had broken out in the Malabar under the leadership of Ali Muslier and V.K. Haji with the support of the communists. Ali was arrested on the 14th of September 1921 while he was on his way to Malabar with Gandhi to the Mopla rioters. On the 1st of November 1921, all of the accused barring the Lajpatacharya were convicted and sentenced to 2 years rigorous punishment. The pandemonium created by the Khilafatists in Bombay upon the arrival of the Prince of Wales gave Gandhi the reason he needed to postpone its launch. From mid-November, the government began mass arrests of agitators in several parts of the country. This was followed by arrests of prominent leaders such as Maulana Azad. Ajmal Khan, the moderate Muslim, and a follower of Gandhi, dealt with the grave situation in Malabar. On the propaganda for the cause of the Khilafat and Kemal Ataturk's rise in Turkey, the following resolutions were passed. On the Mopla riots, the following was the resolution passed: Mopla unrest.
Gandhi's claim that we shall be able to solve the Punjab and the Khilafat problems is incapable of realization so long as India is not completely independent. The Khilafat question is not possible of solution so long as British imperialism is not broken. The colonial form of self-government would not solve the Khilafat question, but it would, on the other hand, go against the Khilafat for this reason. Mohani's defense of the Mopla rioters at the League's session was not a one-off occurrence. He said that since the Moplas suspected their Hindu neighbors of colluding with the government, they were justified in presenting the Quran to the Hindus. Mohani dominated the Khilafat conference which was held on the 26th of December 1921. His resolution for complete independence was opposed by Ajmal Khan and accepted by half of the delegates. The ulema demanded Swaraj only as a way of punishing the British for their dismantling of the caliphate.
Gandhi's presence in the CKC prevented that organization too from calling for complete independence. As for civil disobedience, a heavily aviated position was taken, namely that it could be initiated if both central and provincial organizations were convinced that it would be conducted peacefully. The brutality suffered by Hindus in large numbers in the Mopla riots in August 1921 only vindicated the need for organizations like the Mahasabha. On the 5th of February 1922, Gandhi suspended the decision to launch the movement. As an alternative to mass civil disobedience, Gandhi proposed mass spinning of the charkha to make khadi. In August 1922, Ataturk-led Turkey managed to defeat Greece and recapture Smyrna and Asia Minor, which lifted the Muslim spirit in Bharat. When the CKC and Muslims in Bharat decided to volunteer support to Turkey, the British Indian government invoked the Foreign Enlistment Act of 1870. As for the distinction between the temporal and the spiritual powers of the Caliph, the Khilafatists claimed that since the Grand National Assembly was now the defender of
the Congress should bring about real agreement between all these communities. The rights of every minority should be clearly recognized. The Hindus and the Mohammedans who constitute the bulk of the people should be prepared to give them even more than their proportional share in the Swaraj administration. Das, Motilal Nehru and Khaliquzaman formed the Congress Khilafat Swaraj Party, or the Swaraj Party, in January 1923. The old policy of loyalty to the British to counteract the Hindu Congress was back in force. However, the unexpected blow to the Khilafatists once again came from Turkish nationalists, who declared Turkey a republic hailmade by Kemal Ataturk. Jinnah concluded that each of the movements initiated by Gandhi had failed to achieve its goal. The League had made a comeback while the Congress was a divided house.
The 39th annual session of the Congress was held in Belgaum in December 1924. It was agreed that non-cooperation as a national program would be suspended except for boycott of foreign cloth. The spinning franchise, also known as the Khadi movement, was launched. The period after December 1924 would witness the gradual movement of the pan-Islamist Muslim leaders thrown up by the Khilafat movement in three different directions. The second group, which included Chaudhry Khaliquzaman, would move to the League, owing to its revival by and under Jinnah. This group too would work for the cause of Muslims in Bharat. The third group, who called themselves nationalist Muslims, as opposed to Muslim. Riots in Maligan, Malabar, Multan, Lahore, Saharanpur, Amritsar, Allahabad, Calcutta, Delhi, Gulbarg, Kohat, Lucknow, Shahjahanpur and Nagpur.
Nair points out that on the 15th of March 1920, a Khilafat committee was formed in Malegaon with a body of volunteers. The problem with the idea was that it did not allow people the choice of non-participation. Nair points out that the local authorities decided to initiate legal proceedings against 24 Khilafat volunteers. The danger to the peace of India, internally and externally, was never so great as it is now. The internal situation, in my opinion, was never so menacing as it is today. The Muslim extremists are even more violent in their language than Mr. Gandhi himself. The Muslim mob fury was at its height and almost all the temples within the range of the mob, some 50 in number, were desecrated. On the 8th of September 1924, the Muslims of Kohat reportedly took a vow of divorce at a local mosque, that if their demands were not fulfilled by the authorities and Jivan Das was not punished to their satisfaction, they would take the law in their own hands and do what was expected of them by their faith, or
the Mopla outrage of 1921-1922 was not an aberration. It would be factually incorrect to pin the blame for the outrage entirely on the Khilafat movement and agitation. I will limit myself to drawing from sources and other scholarly articles to present the facts relating to the Mopla outrage against the backdrop of the Khilafat agitation. Given the secular attempt to obfuscate the facts regarding this subject, I have consciously chosen to quote extensively from various sources to present a more objective basis from which to draw conclusions. John Banninger observed that for a century before the Mopla outrage of 1921, there were at least 51 outbreaks of Mopla fanaticism. For the last 100 years at least, the Mopla community has been disgraced from time to time by murderous outrages.
The Mopla Outrages Act and Mopla War Knives Act of 1855 resulted in a significant reduction in, if not elimination of, the outrages. Prior to 1841, these outrages were the work of single fanatics, without open aid or sympathy from others. In 1852 there had been 16 actual outbreaks, by Moplas, in which murder had been committed or attempted. Crimes against which the law was pointed, and that was the murder, in 1855, of the collector and magistrate, Mr. Connolly, in revenge for his having been instrumental in deporting the Mopla high priest, who had been found strongly to incite his disciples to outrage, to encourage them in crimes, and to give his sanction to and blessing on their perpetration. As a Mopla captured at Payan Temple in 1898 put it, it was decided to. The pattern of the Mopla outbreak was dictated by the fact that participants had no intention of evading the heavy hand of justice. The defining characteristic of the Mopla outbreak was devotion to death. The Tangals, Sayyids of the Mambram or the Mampuram Mosque in Tirarangadi played a crucial role in the indoctrination of the Moplas.
The Mopla outrage of 1921 must be understood before it is reduced to the simplistic Marxist template of a peasant rebellion. The Khilafat agitation presented the Mapilas in Malabar as well as the Khilafatists elsewhere with the perfect excuse to vent their medieval fanaticism. Ironically, when the Swadeshi and boycott movements began in Bengal in 1905 to protest against the partition of Bengal, the Muslims of Bengal did not want to be coerced into the agitation of the Malabar tenants. Association intensified and merged with calls for non-cooperation with the Khilafat agitation. Both the Nambudiris and the Neers would be at the receiving end of the Mopla outrage. Dispute arose in the village of Pokkotur in Ernad Taluk between the Nilambar Raja, a Nambudiri landlord, and V. Muhammad, a Mopla Khilafatist. When the police arrived to search the residence of the Mopla Khilafatist, drums began to be beaten in the mosques in the area. Hundreds of Moplas from nearby villages, including Khilafatists in their khaki uniforms, converged on the area.
On the 21st of August, the troops returned to Calicut since the city was surrounded on three sides by the Moplas. On the 22nd of August, Ali Musiliar declared himself king of Tirarangadi. On the 26th of August, there was another round of confrontation with a huge mob of Moplas, which resulted in 400 Moplas being killed. On the 31st of August, both sides clashed when the Moplas opened fire. This left 24 Moplas dead. More than 40 Hindus were taken to the Tangal with their hands tied behind their back. 38 men were murdered, one of whom a pensioned head constable to whom he owed a grudge had his head neatly divided into two halves. We want to know who is responsible for these acts and atrocities. Was it not within the power of government to have avoided this catastrophe or minimized the severity of this catastrophe to a certain extent?
Sir William Vincent, there is no sympathy for a movement purely non-violent, non-cooperation. Sir Vincent, the government and local authorities were apparently misled in this matter. Up to the present, one British officer and 3 British of other ranks have been killed, 1 British officer and a number of other ranks have been wounded. 2 assistant superintendents of police, 1 inspector and 2 head constables have been killed, a planter has been murdered, and others have narrowly escaped. I do not remember the Honourable Sir M. Dadabhoy standing up then and saying, "You must take more drastic action. You must strengthen your military forces, prosecute here, and prosecute there." The question when to undertake and when to forbear from general repressive measures against a movement of this character is always one of difficulty for any government to decide. I can only say that all possible measures to suppress the rising have been taken, but the situation is far from satisfactory.
European community also suffered much at the hands of the rioters. Annamalai Chettiar, founder of Annamalai University and one of the founders of Indian Bank, commented on the atrocities. Muslim League members said riots had nothing to do with religion, blamed government for entering mosque and Hindu landlords for tenancy issues. Sankaran Nair wrote an article titled, "Diabolical Atrocities," on the Malabar outrage. He describes the atrocities committed by the Mopla rebels. Nair calls for an inquiry into the relations between the Mopla peasants and the Zamindars.
Annie Besant's stinging open letter to Gandhi, titled, "Malabar's Agony," in New India. On the other hand, I have never heard of the modesty of a Mopla woman being outraged by a Mopla rebel. Can he not feel a little sympathy for thousands of women left with only rags, driven from home, for little children born of the flying mothers on roads in refuge camps? The misery is beyond description. Girl wives, pretty and sweet, with eyes half blind with weeping, distraught with terror. Old women tottering, whose faces become written with anguish, and who cry at a gentle touch and a kind look, waking out of a stupor of misery only to weep. Can you conceive of a more ghastly and inhuman crime than the murders of babies and pregnant women? There are several instances of such mean atrocities which are not revealed by people. Here are a few extracts from a joint letter sent by the members of the Kerala Congress to Gandhi. 75 Truth is infinitely of more paramount importance than Hindu-Muslim unity or Swaraj.
Did the Moplas commit such atrocities, sacrifice their lives in the cause of their religion? Maulana Mohani justifies the looting of Hindus by Moplas as lawful by way of commandeering in a war between the latter and the government. Petition was written by the women of Malabar to the wife of the Viceroy, Lord Reading, 78, to her gracious and compassionate ladyship. We, the Hindu women of Malabar of varying ranks and stations in life who have recently been overwhelmed by the tremendous catastrophe known as the Mopla Rebellion, take the liberty to supplicate your ladyship for sympathy and succor. Our houses have been burnt or destroyed, many of our breadwinners killed, all our property looted, our cattle slaughtered. Many refugees who went back have paid for their temerity with their lives. Our ambition after all is low enough, sufficient compensation to save us and our children from starvation, and enough military protection against massacre and outrage are all that we want.
The outbreak was essentially a rebellion against the British government. The Hindus were visited by a dire fate at the hands of the Moplas. This was not a Hindu-Muslim riot. This was just a Bartholomew. I believe it is without a parallel in the history of the world. Close upon 1,000 years ago, the Arab Mohammedans scented the desert air of Sindh and found its sand mounds and date groves reminding him of Hejaz, of Arabia Felix. Muslim domination of the country remained more or less an unbroken chain, till in comparatively more recent times supremacy hung in the balance between the Maratha spear and the British bayonet. The methods of theological thought of the two communities are totally different. The two communities have different notions of sovereignty. There must be something imperishable in the cherished beliefs of both.
The coming of the British into the country was the signal for Hinduism and Islam to retire, each within its own limits. A free press, and till very recently an irresponsible press, public speaking, have engendered indefinite and vague ideas of home rule, self-government, autonomy and Swaraj. It is the English who have carefully prepared the ground and sown the seed that has germinated into what some of them are now disposed to consider to be noxious weed. Syed Hussain Bilgrami, CSI, has been appointed to the Executive Council of the Viceroy. Bilgrami is a towering personality among the Mussalmans of India. Appointment of Indian Mussalmans to high judicial posts in different provinces of the country is indicative of the desire of the government to cooperate with the Indian Mussalmans. The Mussalmans of India make up between 1/5 and 1/4 of the entire population. The importance of the Mussalmans of India, however, if not based in their comparative numerical strength, is incalculably great on grounds of political considerations. Our Hindu countrymen have paid us the just compliment, time after time, to say that their great organization, the Indian National Congress, remains incomplete as a political agency without the Mussalmans freely participating in its
Mohammedan community is confronted with problems of great political import. One of the questions that the community had before it was whether its political requirements in relation to government and to its countrymen of other races and creeds called for a separate political organization. The presence of representative Mussalmans from all the different parts of India in our gathering today is an assurance that the community has realized its political responsibility. The need of India is to recognize that true patriotism lies in taking measure of the conditions existing in fact and devoting oneself to amelioration. Swaraj or self-government, autonomy or a self-governing member of the empire, in other words, home rule under the aegis of the British Crown in India, is possible only when racial, religious, social and intellectual disparities are removed. Is it wise to weaken the solidarity of political unity? What has kept the Mohammedans as a people away from the Indian National Congress? I deny the accusation that the Mohammedans of India have not either the capacity to understand the value of cooperation for the accomplishment of reforms or the courage to face official disapprobation.
The moderate wants autonomy or representative government under the aegis of the British Crown. The extremist wants the same but without the fiction of the aegis. The mere elevation of an ideal is no title to its serious acceptance. Our ideal should be united India, united in a patriotism that leaves distant and visionary ideals to molder in the vagueness and impracticability of their conception. The responsibility lies with those who, infatuated with the seductions of an idealistic but impractical autonomy, have caused widespread intellectual distemper. Let the Indian National Congress shake itself free from the baneful blandishments of self-governing member of the British Empire. Mohammedans can work with Hindus on non-controversial lines. The creed of the All India Muslim League is cooperation with the rulers. Mohammedans cannot hope to secure the true protection which their interests demand.